Hi everyone, today I'm going to tell you the general circulation of the atmosphere. So the direction of the wind, there are three factors that affect wind direction, and they are pressure gradient, the Coriolis effect, and friction. Talking about pressure gradient, wind goes from a high pressure to a low pressure. There are more air molecules in a higher pressure, and those molecules in the higher pressure will want to move to a lower pressure. So on a weather map, there are these lines called isobars, and they are these black lines that you see in these pictures. They are used to identify these high and low pressures, as seen on this picture. So in this region, we have a low pressure region and then high pressure region. So the closer these isobars are to each other, the higher the winds will be, and the more widely spaced the isobars are they are gonna have light winds that will occur. So as we can see right here, they're kind of spaced closer together, which means that there's going to be high winds, and then winds that are more spaced out, like over here, are going to have light winds. So now talking about friction, friction will always act in the opposite direction of motion, and often near the surface, wind direction won't be parallel to the isobars. The third factor that affects wind direction is called the Coriolis effect, and this effect has to do with the rotation of the Earth. So wind is a horizontal air movement, and it moves in a straight line, but because the Earth is rotating, the straight lines become deflected, making these straight lines become curved, and that's basically what the Coriolis effect does. And because of the Coriolis effect, the wind direction isn't always going to be a high to low pressure. Why or where does air rise and descend? So winds blow inward in lower pressure zones and outward in high pressure zones. Low pressure zones produce bad weather and are considered cyclones, while high pressure zones produce good weather and are considered anticyclones. The bad weather in low pressure zones comes from the wind on the ground that converges with warm air, and because of that convergence, it forces the warm air to go upwards, causing storms and stuff. So how does the general circulation impact the climate in certain areas? So near the equator, there is rising air there and pressure zones called the equatorial low. The upper level air moves toward the 30-degree north and south lines and sinks back down to the surface. The sinking is known as the subtropic highs, which holds the Australian, the Arabian, and the North African deserts, and they all have diverging air there, which means good weather and hardly any clouds. At the surface, the air moves towards the equator toward the north and south poles. Towards the poles are known as the westerlies, and towards the equator is known as the trade winds. As the easterlies move toward the poles, they encounter the cool polar easterlies in the region called the subpolar lows, which is a storm belt. The converging regions of the warm and cold air create the polar front. The cold polar air subsides and spreads down towards the equator. So to sum it up, the low pressure zones are at the equator and the subpolar, and they have a lot of rain there. And the high pressure zones are at the subtropical and polar highs, and they have low amounts of rain that occur there.